All right, hello everyone. So what I wanted to do was go over really quick. I know a lot of you had reached out and had questions about essentially how do we get from this side on the left to this side on the right? What functionally is actually happening? So what we want to do is I want to make this as informative as possible. So I'm going to simplify it as much as I can. So what we'll do is we're going to go over kind of some of the first steps of how we address a person's posture and where do we really go from there. And I've actually outlined here our standing posture photos. And this is one of the things that we want to look at first is the standing posture photos. Now, there are many other things that we are using as an assessment. This is an assessment, the ability to read posture. And we can get a lot out of looking and reading posture. But this isn't the only thing that we use. There are functional, there are movement assessments, right? There are, one of the biggest things we use are gait patterns. So watching a person walk and looking at their walking patterns are some of the things that, what we call functional test that we can use to cross-reference our findings here. When we're looking at a posture like this, we want to also see how the body moves so we can cross-reference and we can learn, okay, what is actually happening with this person. So the first thing we want to do is kind of give you a basic, just a basic idea of what are you looking for in the standing posture. 4 different views here. The first thing you want to do is you definitely want to take notice of whatever the biggest things that you see are that honestly, just in your trained eye, and again, a trained eye is very different from person to person. I've spent many years looking at postural photos and analyzing things, so my eye is trained a certain way, and there are things that I'm going to see that, you're just not going to see. And I remember how that evolved for me over time. There were many things that I wasn't able to see that over the years I started to be able to see. That evolved over time and practice, lots and lots of practice. We're looking for anything that deviates from optimal posture. So to understand optimal posture, you want to know that the body has 8 load joints: the ankles, the knees, the hips, and the shoulders. And ideally, and what should happen is that these load joints should stack vertically on top of each other. They should be 90-degree angles from left to right, up top to bottom. They are perfectly stacked. And when that happens, we know all the muscles and fascia are working together with the right amount of tension, the right way, and that's what gives us good posture. From the side views, you can see the gravity line here is what this line is. You should see the shoulders, the head, the center mass. It's really the center mass of the shoulder, the center mass of the hips, the knees, and the ankles, on the bone here should stack vertically on top of each other. Now, for him, as I'm looking at all of these things, the first thing that I really notice is probably the loudest thing here is going to be what's going on in his shoulder position and his hand position. Massive amount of rotation here happening in the shoulders. And you can see his arms kind of coming in front of his body. You can look at the back view of his body. We can see that the hands, you can't even see the hands. You can also start to see this rotation that's happening in the shoulder, right? And you can see how his body's kind of leaning over to that left side. Now his body looks like, even though he's leaning to the left side here, you can see more of his body, his left side of the body on the left side of the line. On this side, I'm actually seeing more of his body on the right side of the line than on the left side. And that's how we know he's not necessarily leaning to his left. You could look at it and it looks like he's leaning to his left, but he's actually not leaning to his left. He's rotating from right to left. And there's a huge difference here in being able to see a subtlety like that can really confuse people when they're looking at a posture. And what we really want to do is to see rotation, we can go to the side views. And this is a much easier way. This is how I want to look at rotation. And we can see everything on the left should look like what it looks like on the right. But as you notice for him, his ear, starting from the top, you want to go from the top and work your way down. The ear's on the line here. It's in front of the line here. You can see the shoulder, the center mass of the shoulder is on the line here. Center mass of the shoulder is in front of the line. The line runs down his arm here, but over here, the line is behind his arm. So his arm is in front of the line. if we look at the space now, so you can see this is the shoulder rotation, but there's a difference between shoulder rotation and the rotation of his actual body. Look at the line and look at the very back line of his body. You can see from that line to his back, there's a certain amount of space. And here, even though he has more back showing because he has his arm kind of rotated forward, the space between the line and his back is smaller than it is on this side. You can see more of his back, his arm's covering more of his back here, but the space behind the line to his back is greater here than it is over here, which means his upper body's thoracic region is rotated forward. Also his pelvis, you can see more glute behind the line on that side, but on here you can't see as much glute behind the line. So his whole body, right side rotated forward, okay? Not just the shoulder rotation, there's a big difference. So then you can see a lot, there's other things. You can see the difference in the feet. You can see the difference in the knee position, all of that. Now, again, every person that shows up here is going to have a very different goal, right? Now, he has scoliosis, and one of the things he wants to fix is the scoliosis. You might have pain. You might have range of motion issues. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're dealing with. We still have to do the exact same thing, which is look at the entire body as a whole to understand what's happening. So what's happening in his spine, this is why, an x-ray isn't going to help at all in understanding posture and understanding why his spine is that way, right? It doesn't mean anything to us. I can't use that information because what determines the position of the spine is how all this stuff together is working together. I need to know what his ankles are doing, right? What is his hands doing? What are his shoulders? The rotation that's happening here. All these other things are so different from person to person. So we have to analyze, we have to zoom out. It's what we call zooming out and analyze the posture. So that's what we see with him. Now, the first step here, again, once we do that, we now have to cross-reference with some of the functional movement assessments, because we can form a theory here of why, once we look at the rotation and we look at each joint and we look at all of these things together, we can form a theory of what's actually happening in his body, but then we need to test it. We actually need to go through the functional movement test. We need to go through his gait analysis. We need to watch him walk, because then we're going to learn a whole new set of information. I'm not going to do that now because obviously I don't have him here. And that, I could spend months could spend a whole year on just learning gait patterns and mechanics. And again, that's why we don't have time to go into the intimate details. It just gets too confusing. Each aspect of his posture can take such a long time to learn and understand. So we want to do a general overview, which is what we're doing now. But we're going to test his gait pattern. We're going to look at, other functional assessments like, for example, his fall forward. What does he do when his body falls forward? What do his hips do, right? I'm looking at this from all different angles. What's the difference from one shoulder to the other? What's the difference from how his arms hang, the spacing between his knees, right? There's so many things that we're going to look at here to determine, what we're doing is cross-referencing that to these standing posture photos. And we're cross-referencing what we're getting from the functional assessments with the other functional assessments and with his posture. And together with that information, we're going to form a theory of what we think is actually happening. Does that make sense? So the next thing that we want to do is, okay, what do we go from here? We formed a theory. We've done all the movement assessments. Now it's time to change things. And this is where we go into the movements. This is where we want to change how the muscles and fascia work together in order to recreate symmetry. And there's a whole process involved with that. The first part of the process, the first step in what I want to accomplish with a person, and there are some instances where this would change and it wouldn't be the first step, but in general circumstances, the first thing that I want to do, and I want to figure out how do I get them unrotated. So remember, rotation is this thing that we were showing here about his, the space between the line and his back, right? All of that stuff being greater here than it is on this side, right? We saw that. We want to get rid of that rotation and actually get this left side and right side to go back vertical on the line before I do anything else. Okay, there's an order of operations that actually matters. It's important in this process because the brain's in control of how all these muscles and fascias are working together, and they are working together. They're not doing individual things. So you can't just get in here like it's a machine and just work with this piece, right? Just swap this part out and put, and work the muscles here. And then, okay, we'll go over here and work here. And, people talk about working total body, but what they mean is like, let's get my whole body involved in a movement. Or, I'm working each joint, right? Each part of the body. That's not what I mean when I say total body. It's completely different. We're looking at how all the parts of the body are working together. Because remember, every exercise you do, every manipulation you do, if I do a shoulder exercise, it's not real. We can call it a shoulder exercise because there's primary muscles working in the shoulders. When I do a shoulder exercise, you think it's just his shoulder that's going to change? No, it's the entire body. Everything in his body is going to respond to that, and then his body's going to be in a new position. So with every exercise, you don't want to manipulate or look at the body as though I'm just, I'm doing a shoulder exercise. It's not a shoulder exercise. It's each exercise, each manipulation of the body. It doesn't matter what area you're manipulating. It manipulates the whole body. If you can train yourself to see that and not see what each individual part is doing in the body, you will transform your understanding of how everything in the body works together. I believe this is one of the biggest confusing parts in the body and exercise and fitness and in therapy processes is how people keep segmenting every piece of the body as though they're doing separate things from each other. And they're not. They all work together. So we want to get back on track here, which is addressing the rotation. Now, there are a lot of things that can contribute to why he's rotated. All the other variables that we added up together, that we figured out during his movement assessments, his gait analysis, and we have to see it all together. So his rotation's not the same as your rotation. You can be rotated. It's not the same as his. It's completely different, and therefore what you need to do is going to be different than him. So what we want to do here is now we're going to use the exercises. We're going to start off with some movements, and then we're going to test and look at his body and see what actually happened. Once we do those movements, his body's going to be in a new position. We can confirm or deny whether or not we actually took out the rotation or moved him in the direction of taking out that rotation. Does that make sense? Even when we give an exercise, the exercise itself is also an assessment. It's also a test that we can use to analyze, okay, we gave him the exercise and, his body did this. And, that's the thing is we can't say, 100% confirm just because I give him an exercise how his body's going to respond, right? That's why we need to look at it with objective eyeballs. Now, granted, over time, having done this for so many years, now I have a pretty great idea of probably what's going to happen, okay? But that took many, many, many years and many, working with many bodies, a lot of practice, okay? So once we address his rotation, his body's going to get into a new position, and then we continue the process from that point where we're using exercise and the exercises and the movements to kind of start untying his body. And that is the outcome. Once we are addressing those functional asymmetries in the body, right? The rotation, all these things are going to change. A shoulder position, a rotation that's happening at his arms, all these deviations start to change. And therefore the functional test, right? How all those muscles and fascia work together to perform the test are going to be different. And that's what we did. Once we took out his rotation and followed some other steps with the exercises that we used. And again, it's not what exercises we used isn't as important. It's definitely not important right now in terms of you want to really understand how to read the body and it's being able to see the position that the body's in and responding to the position that the body's in. Not thinking of the exercises in terms of what does this exercise do, because you can look at an exercise and define it by this exercise it does X, Y, and Z. But the thing is that means absolutely nothing, because depending on the person you give it to, it doesn't do X, Y, Z, it does something else, because you have to look at the person that you're giving it to. Every one exercise, it does not do the exact same thing to every person, to any people. As a matter of fact, you give one exercise to 100 people and it's going to do 100 different things. That's why it doesn't matter what the exercise does. What's more important is how are you looking at the position that the body's in, and how are you using exercise based off of the position that the body's in. That's what matters the most. And that's how we get from this left view right here to this right view right here. When he performs this movement now, the muscles and fascia work together more symmetrically, and you can see the bones have shifted, the joint positions have shifted, everything has changed. So there you have it. That is the introduction, understanding of how we got from the left side here to the right side here. I hope that that was of some kind of value. If that made sense to you and you did get value, let me know. I'm sure you have other questions. Feel free to comment those questions, write those questions. And that's it for now. So thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.